The ground shook violently beneath Ambassador Thyros as he gripped the emergency transmitter with all four of his shaking arms. His blue-green scales had turned pale white with fear as another massive explosion lit up the sky outside the Villani council chamber. Through the cracked windows, he could see the burning remains of their once beautiful capital city. The Bruthan War fleet had finally arrived at their homeworld, just like they had at 47 other star systems before this one. Every single time, the result was the same complete destruction of any civilization that dared to resist them. The Brothan were known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate predators, creatures so ruthless and powerful that most species surrendered the moment they saw their ships approaching. Dyros knew this was probably his last chance to save his people. His hands trembled as he activated the Galactic Emergency Beacon, sending out a desperate message across the stars to anyone who might listen. The device hummed to life, broadcasting his voice to every corner of known space. "This is our final transmission from the Villani homeworld," he spoke into the communicator, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The Bruthan Armada has reached our last stronghold. Our military is destroyed. Our colonies are burning. We have nowhere left to run." He paused, gathering what little courage remained in his terrified heart. "To any civilization receiving this message, we offer our most precious technology, our quantum core systems that can power entire planets. All we ask in return is military help. Please, if anyone out there can fight these monsters, we're begging you to answer." The transmission shot out into space at faster-than-light speeds, carrying Thyros' desperate plea across thousands of star systems. Most civilizations that received it would simply delete the message and pray the Bruthan never turned their attention toward them. After all, what could anyone do against an enemy that had never lost a single battle? Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, Captain Lee Haon was enjoying a quiet cup of coffee on the bridge of the UES Horizon when the alien message suddenly appeared on his screens as one of humanity's first deep space exploration vessels. The Horizon had been mapping unknown star systems for the past 6 months. This was their first contact with any alien civilization. Lee Haon's experienced eyes studied the tactical display that appeared alongside the message. His ship's advanced AI had automatically translated the alien language and created a visual representation of what was happening in the distant Villani system. What he saw made him set down his coffee cup immediately. Hundreds of massive alien warships were surrounding a small blue planet, while streams of refugee vessels desperately tried to escape. The attacking fleet was enormous, easily 10 times larger than anything humanity had ever built. Each of the enemy ships looked like it could destroy an entire human city with a single shot. Communications. Officer Park Soo looked up from her, consoled with wide eyes. "Captain, the aliens are offering us something called quantum core technology in exchange for military assistance. According to our computers, this technology is at least 50 years ahead of anything we currently have." Lee Hyun stood up from his command chair, his weathered face serious as he considered their options. He had spent 20 years in the human military before joining the exploration program, and he knew a desperate situation when he saw one. These Villani people were facing complete extinction, and they were willing to give away their most advanced technology just for a chance at survival. The smart thing to do would be to ignore the message and continue their peaceful exploration mission. After all, what could one human ship do against such a massive enemy fleet? But something about the alien's terrified voice reminded him of his own species' history. Humans had faced extinction many times throughout their violent past, and they had always survived by fighting back against impossible odds. "Park Soo, send an immediate message to Earth Command," he ordered, his voice filled with determination. "Tell them we've made first contact with an alien civilization under attack by a hostile force. Request permission to investigate and possibly intervene." He paused, looking at the display showing thousands of enemy ships. "Also tell them we may have found our first real test in the galaxy. If we're going to represent humanity among the stars, we might as well start by showing the universe what we're made of." As the Horizon changed course toward the distant battle, None of the crew could have imagined that they were about to introduce the galaxy to Earth's most dangerous export human military tactics refined by thousands of years of warfare on a planet where only the strongest and smartest survived. The Volani. Delegates gathered nervously in the main docking bay of their orbital station, their multiple eyes constantly darting toward the approaching human vessel. Elder Nathera, the oldest and most experienced among them, had spent the last several hours studying the strange ship through their most powerful telescopes. What she saw made her stomach twist with worry. The human vessel was unlike anything. In their databases, where Volani ships were round and smooth, designed for comfort and peaceful exploration, this human craft was all sharp angles and aggressive lines. Weapon ports dotted its hull like the eyes of some metallic predator, and its dark surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Even more disturbing, their sensors couldn't identify most of the weapon systems bristling from its frame. "Remember," Nathera whispered to her fellow council members, "we must be polite but cautious. We know nothing about these beings except that they answered our call for help." She adjusted her ceremonial robes with trembling appendages. "And that, their ship looks designed for war." The docking clamps engaged with a loud metallic clang that made several Volani jump. Through the reinforced viewing windows, they watched as the alien airlock slowly cycled open. What emerged made their worst fears seem almost reasonable. Dr. Kim Yuna stepped through the airlock with the confident stride of someone completely comfortable in hostile environments. She was tall, by Volani standards, with pale skin and dark hair pulled back in a practical military style. But it was her eyes that truly frightened them. Forward-facing, sharp, and constantly scanning the room like a hunter evaluating potential threats. Behind her came Lieutenant Choi Min and two other humans, all moving with the same predatory grace. Their uniforms were practical rather than decorative. Each carried equipment that the Volani couldn't identify but assumed were weapons of some kind. The universal translator mounted on the station's wall crackled to life as Dr. Kim Yuna spoke. Her voice was calm and professional, but there was an underlying strength that suggested she was used to being obeyed. "Greetings," she said, inclining her head slightly in what the Volani hoped was a respectful gesture. "I am Dr. Kim Yuna of the Terran Exploration Fleet. We received your distress call and came as quickly as possible." Elder Nathera's forehands shook as she consulted the datapad containing their species classification system. The information she found there made her scales pale to an almost transparent white. She looked up at the humans with barely concealed terror. "Your species," she began, her voice quavering. "According to our galactic databases, you originate from what we classify as a Class 12 death world. That is the highest danger rating in our system." The humans exchanged glances, and Lieutenant Choi Min actually smiled slightly, which only made him look more frightening to the herbivorous Volani. "Well, Earth does have its challenges," he said casually, as if discussing the weather rather than surviving on the most dangerous type of planet. Known to galactic science, the Volani council members looked at each other in horror. Class 12. Worlds were theoretical nightmares. Planets so hostile that most scientists believed no intelligent life could possibly evolve there. These worlds featured extreme weather, deadly predators, toxic atmospheres, natural disasters, and environments that would kill most galactic species within hours. Only the most aggressive and adaptable predator species could survive such conditions, and those that did were considered extremely dangerous by every peaceful civilization in the galaxy. The fact that humans not only survived on such a world, but had developed space travel meant they were potentially more deadly than even the Bruthon. But even as fear filled their hearts, the Volani couldn't ignore their desperate situation. Through the station's communication system, reports continued to arrive of more colonies falling to the Bruthan advance. 3 more star systems had gone silent in just the past few hours, their populations either dead or enslaved. Elder Nathera took a deep, shuddering breath and made what might have been the most important decision in her species' history. "Concerns about your origins? We accept your assistance," she declared, though her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Our people are dying, and we have no other choice," looking directly into Dr. Kim Yuna's predatory eyes. I must admit, we pray that, in calling for help, we haven't invited something worse than the Bruthen themselves into our territory." The humans remained silent for a moment, and the Villani couldn't tell if they were offended or amused by the comment. Finally, Dr. Kim Yuna spoke again, her voice carrying a hint of something that might have been sympathy. "Elder Nithra, I understand your fear, but I can promise you this. We didn't travel across the galaxy to harm innocent people. We came because someone asked for help, and humans have a hard time ignoring that kind of call."
Ah!
She gestured toward the tactical displays showing the approaching Bruthen fleet. "Besides, from what we've seen of your enemy, you're going to need all the Class 12 survival instincts you can get." Major Han Juwu stood in the center of the Villani command room, his experienced eyes analyzing the three-dimensional holographic display that showed recent Bruthone attacks across the galaxy. The images were disturbing but predictable, massive. Fleets appearing suddenly in peaceful star systems, overwhelming local defenses through sheer numbers, then systematically destroying any resistance until entire civilizations begged for mercy. "Look at this pattern," he said, pointing to different sections of the display. "Every single attack follows the exact same strategy. They jump in with overwhelming force, target the biggest population centers first to create maximum fear, then wait for the survivors to surrender." He shook his head with the confidence of someone who had studied warfare his entire life. "They fight like apex predators who have never encountered anything that could fight back effectively." The assembled Villani military leaders watched nervously. As Han Giwu highlighted various battle scenarios, Commander Vexstar, who held the highest military rank among the Villani forces, shifted uncomfortably in his specialized chair. His species had evolved from herbivorous creatures, and even their military thinking reflected a prey animal's mentality. "Major, with respect, the Bruthen have conquered 47 different star systems over the past 50 years, Vexstar said, his voice filled with defeat before the battle had even begun. "No species in recorded galactic history has ever successfully opposed them. Every civilization that has tried to fight back has been completely destroyed." Sergeant Omina, who had been quietly observing the Villani officers, decided it was time for some brutal honesty. "That's because you're all prey animals," she said bluntly, causing several of the alien officers to visibly flinch at her directness. "You think defensively? Your entire military doctrine is based on survival and escape, not on victory and conquest." The uncomfortable silence that followed her statement was broken when Major Han Jiwoo activated a series of new tactical scenarios. On the holographic display, these showed different ways human forces could potentially engage the Bruthen fleet, using strategies that made the Villani officers gasp in surprise. The Bruthen have been successful because they expect their enemies to either run away in terror or hide behind defensive positions until they're eventually overwhelmed, Hanjuo explained. They don't anticipate counterattacks, flanking maneuvers, or strategic deception because none of their previous enemies have ever used these tactics. Over the following week, human military advisors worked around the clock to prepare both defensive positions and offensive capabilities. But their biggest challenge wasn't technical, it was cultural. The human officers spent countless hours trying to train Villani forces in basic combat tactics that went against every instinct. Their species had developed over millions of years of evolution. The Villani soldiers struggled with concepts that seemed natural to humans, but were completely alien to their way of thinking. Ideas, like acceptable losses, where some troops might be sacrificed to achieve a larger victory, were nearly impossible for them to understand. The concept of sacrificial gambits, where forces would deliberately put themselves in danger to create opportunities for their allies, made many Villani soldiers physically ill. Captain Antaiho found himself constantly explaining these concepts to his mixed human Villani training units. "Listen carefully," he would tell them during practice sessions. "For your entire history, your species has survived by avoiding conflict and running from stronger predators. That worked fine when you only faced natural threats on your homeworld. But the Bruthen aren't just another predator. They're an intelligent enemy that has learned to exploit your instincts against you." He would point to the tactical displays, showing Bruthen attack patterns. "They know you'll try to protect your civilians first, so they target population centers. They know you'll retreat when facing superior numbers, so they always attack with overwhelming force. They've turned your own survival instincts into weapons against you. The human training methods were harsh but necessary. Svilani soldiers had to learn to think like predators rather than prey, to see opportunities for attack rather than just looking for escape routes. It was perhaps the most difficult challenge their species had ever faced, completely changing their fundamental approach to conflict. Remember this. Captain Ontaiho told his mixed unit during their final training session before the expected Brothan arrival. We're not just defending your homeworld anymore. We're teaching the entire galaxy that even the most successful predators can become prey when they face something more dangerous than themselves. The Bruthan think they're the ultimate hunters, but they've never encountered a species from a Class 12. Deathworld. It's time to show them what real apex predators look like. The massive Bruthan war fleet tore through hyperspace toward the Villani system. Their ships arranged in the same intimidating formation that had terrorized 47 civilizations before this one. Admiral Crexmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devastator, his razor-sharp mandibles clicking with anticipation as he prepared for another easy victory. For 50 years, the Bruthan had followed the same successful strategy. Jump into a system with overwhelming numbers. Destroy a few major cities to demonstrate their power, then wait for the terrified survivors to surrender. It had worked perfectly every single time, and Crexmore saw no reason why this battle would be any different. Exiting hyperspace in 3.2. 1, announced his navigation officer. The Bruthan fleet materialized in normal space, expecting to see hundreds of Villani ships huddled together in defensive formations around their homeworld. Instead, they found nothing but empty space where their enemies should have been cowering in terror. Admiral Crexmore's 4 eyes widened as he stared at his tactical display. The screen showed only scattered debris and a few abandoned space stations. "Where are the prey ships?" he growled, his voice echoing through the bridge. "Our intelligence reports showed at least 300 vessels defending this system." His tactical officer frantically scanned the area with their most powerful sensors. "Sir, we're detecting minimal energy signatures. It appears most of their fleet has ... vanished." Before Crexmore could respond, his answer came in the most unexpected way possible. Dozens of small, angular fighters suddenly appeared from behind asteroid formations throughout the system. Their advanced stealth systems disengaged simultaneously, revealing a coordinated ambush that caught the Bruthon completely off guard. Lieutenant Yoon Seoek led the first wave of human strike fighters, his ship moving with an agility that seemed impossible to the watching Bruthan. His fighter twisted and rolled through space, dancing between streams of enemy weapons fire like a leaf in the wind. Behind him, 20 more human pilots executed maneuvers that defied everything the Bruthan knew about space combat. "What kind of pilots are these?" gasped Crexmore's weapons officer, as the human fighters carved through their forward formations with surgical precision. The real shock came when Captain Songhari's voice crackled across the communication channels from the UES Defiant. "All units, execute pattern Delta. Time to show these bullies what real military tactics look like." The human main fleet emerged from behind the system's massive gas giant, where they had been hiding in the planet's sensor shadow. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, splitting into multiple attack formations that struck the Bruthan fleet. From 6 different angles simultaneously, Admiral Crexmore watched in growing horror as his carefully arranged battle formation fell apart under the human assault. The Bruthan had never encountered coordinated fleet tactics before. Their entire military strategy was based on using raw intimidation and overwhelming numbers against scattered, terrified opponents who were too frightened to fight back effectively. "Impossible," Crexmore snarled as 3 of his heavy cruisers exploded under concentrated human weapons fire. Streams of plasma and kinetic projectiles tore through his ship's hulls like they were made of paper. "Prey species don't fight like this. They run, they hide, they don't attack." But the humans weren't prey animals. They were the products of a death world where the most dangerous predators on the planet had spent millions of years competing against each other for survival. Only the most adaptable, intelligent, and ruthlessly cunning had managed to not just survive but dominate their hostile homeworld. The human formations moved like a pack of wolves, constantly shifting positions to avoid return fire while maintaining devastating attacks on Bruthan weak points. They used the system's asteroids, moons, and even radiation fields as cover, turning the battlefield itself into a weapon. Lieutenant Yoon Seok's fighter squadron had already destroyed 2 Bruthan destroyers, using tactics the aliens had never seen before. Instead of engaging in direct confrontations, the humans would strike quickly, disappear behind cover, and emerge from completely different angles to attack again. Colonel Lim Junho's voice suddenly crackled across all communication frequencies, broadcasting on channels that even the Bruthon could receive. His words sent a chill through every alien warrior who heard them. "Welcome to Earth's military doctrine," he announced with cold confidence. "For millions of years, we've been fighting the most dangerous predators our planet could produce. We didn't become the dominant species by running away or hiding. Got there by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than everything that tried to kill us." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You've spent 50 years bullying herbivores and prey animals. Now you're facing real apex predators. Adapt or die." Brethren were learning a harsh lesson that would echo throughout the galaxy. There's always a bigger predator. The news of their Vanguard fleet's destruction reached Brethren high command within hours, sending shockwaves through an empire that had never experienced military defeat. For the first time in 50 years, someone had not only resisted their advance, but had actually destroyed significant numbers of their ships. The response was immediate and overwhelming. War-Chieftain Tholgax, the most feared military leader in the Bruthan Empire, personally took command of their main battle fleet. His flagship, the massive dreadnought Bone Crusher, was a monument to Bruthan military might. The ship was so enormous that it could have housed an entire human city within its armored hull. Its weapons were capable of cracking planets in half, standing nearly 12 feet tall with 4 muscular arms and razor-sharp claws. It had personally overseen the conquest of 23 star systems. His reputation for brutality was legendary, even among his own savage species. As his fleet emerged from hyperspace, his deep voice rumbled through the bridge with barely controlled rage. "These insects dared to destroy our ships," he snarled, his massive fists clenching as he stared at the tactical display. "Deploy the terror weapons immediately. These new prey will learn what happens when they resist the Bruthan Empire." The terror weapons were the Bruthans' most feared tools of conquest. Biological agents specifically designed to target the nervous systems of different species. They didn't just kill. They drove entire populations insane with fear and despair. Dozens of civilizations had surrendered after seeing just a few of their colonies infected with these nightmarish weapons. Following the bioweapons came something even more terrifying: the Bruthan shock troops. These weren't ordinary soldiers, but genetically enhanced warriors bred specifically for maximum lethality. Each one stood over 8 feet tall, with enhanced muscles, reinforced bones, and modified claws that could tear through steel. They had been designed to be the ultimate killers, capable of hunting down and destroying any survivors who managed to hide from the terror weapons. Admiral Park Jinwoo watched this massive escalation from the bridge of the UES Retribution, humanity's most advanced warship. His weathered face showed no trace of the fear that Tholgax expected to see in his enemies. Instead, his expression was one of cold, calculating analysis as he studied the incoming threats. "They're escalating because we hurt them," he told his staff officers, his voice calm despite the overwhelming enemy force approaching their position. "Good. Angry enemies make mistakes, and we're going to exploit every single one of them." Happened next stunned both the attacking Bruthan and the defending Villani forces. The human response was unlike anything either species had ever witnessed. Massive orbital bombardment platforms that had been hidden in the system's outer asteroid belt suddenly came online, their weapons charging with enough power to vaporize entire fleets. Technical Sergeant Nam Yuri and her team of electronic warfare specialists went to work with the precision of master craftsmen. Using techniques developed during humanity's long history of technological warfare, they began jamming Bruthan communications, turning their own sensor networks against them, and even hacking into their weapon systems to cause friendly fire. Incidents. The terror weapons, which had broken the will of so many species before, found no terrified populations waiting for them on Volani colonies. Instead, they encountered empty cities and abandoned settlements. The humans had spent the previous weeks evacuating all civilian populations to deep underground bunkers that had been specifically designed to withstand biological attacks, the automated defense systems that the terror weapons encountered instead of helpless civilians were a nasty surprise. These weren't simple defensive turrets, but sophisticated combat drones programmed with human military tactics. They engaged the biological weapons with precise, calculated responses that neutralized the threats before they could spread. War Chieftain. Thulgax watched his most feared weapons fail for the first time in his long military career. His shock. Troops bred to hunt terrified civilians hiding in ruins found themselves facing disciplined human marines who had been trained to fight in environments that would kill most other species. Commander. Kong Su-yang monitored the enemy fleet's movements. From her position at the tactical console, "Sir," she reported to Admiral Park Jinwoo, "the Bruthan forces are regrouping. Their formation patterns suggest they confused. They don't seem to understand why their standard tactics aren't working." Park Jinwoo allowed himself a grim smile as he watched the enemy fleet struggle to adapt to a completely new type of warfare. "They expected to find victims cowering in fear," he said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "Instead, they found professional soldiers who have been preparing for this fight their entire lives. Time to show them what a real death world species can do when we stop playing defense and start hunting." The tide of battle was about to turn, and the Brothan Empire was about to learn why humans had become the apex predators of the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. The asteroid field surrounding the Volani system had always been considered a minor obstacle by previous Bruthan invasions. Just another piece of space debris to navigate around while conquering their latest victims. But Captain Seo Ji-hoon saw something completely different when he looked at those floating mountains of rock and metal. He saw weapons waiting to be used, working around the clock with his engineering teams. Seo Ji-hoon began implementing a strategy that would have seemed impossible to any other species in the galaxy. Using portable gravity manipulators and precision explosives, they started reshaping entire asteroids into kinetic bombardment platforms. These massive chunks of rock and iron were carefully positioned and given precise orbital trajectories that would send them smashing into Bruthan formations at exactly the right moments. The mathematical calculations required for this operation were staggering. Each asteroid had to be moved with perfect timing, accounting for gravitational influences from multiple planets, the system's star, and the constantly shifting positions of both fleets. What made it even more impressive was that human engineers were doing these calculations in real time, making adjustments on the fly as battle conditions changed. Chief Engineer Bae-yuna found herself explaining their tactics to a group of amazed Volani scientists who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. "On Earth, we learned very early that survival meant using everything around us as a weapon," she said, gesturing toward the tactical display showing their modified asteroids. "Our atmosphere could kill us with storms. Our gravity could crush us with avalanches. Radiation from space could fry us alive. And even the ground beneath our feet could open up and swallow entire cities." She pointed to another section of the display where human forces were using the system's massive gas giant as a gravitational slingshot. "We learned that if something in our environment was dangerous, the best strategy wasn't to avoid it. It was to figure out how to make it more dangerous to our enemies than it was to us." The Bruthan fleet watched in growing confusion and horror as their carefully planned battle formations were torn apart by precisely timed asteroid impacts. These weren't random collisions, but calculated strikes that hit their ships at exactly the moments when they were most vulnerable. Massive chunks of rock traveling at incredible speeds would suddenly appear from unexpected angles, smashing through their hulls like cosmic hammers. Even more disturbing was the way human attack squadrons used the gas giant's gravitational field to their advantage. They would dive toward the planet's crushing atmosphere, use its gravity to accelerate to impossible speeds, then emerge from behind the planet's bulk to strike Bruthon ships before disappearing back into the cosmic storm that surrounded the gas giant's turbulent surface. War Chieftain Thulgax stood on his flagship's bridge, watching his assault dissolve into complete chaos. His species had evolved on a harsh world, but it was a straightforward kind of harshness where physical strength and direct confrontation determined victory. The strongest Bruthan became leaders, the fastest became hunters, and the most aggressive became warriors. But they had no concept of using environmental factors as weapons. The idea of turning an entire star system into a battlefield where every asteroid, planet, and gravitational field became part of a coordinated attack was completely alien to their way of thinking. The prey species fight like the void itself opposes us, he rumbled to his increasingly nervous subordinates. Every rock, every planet, every force of nature in this cursed system seems to be working against our ships. The situation became even worse when Major Yang Min-su's Special Forces team successfully infiltrated one of the Bruthan's main supply depots. Using stealth techniques developed in Earth's harshest environments from Arctic tundras to volcanic wastelands, they had approached the enemy facility completely undetected. The humans had learned long ago that the best way to defeat a larger, stronger enemy was to attack their support systems rather than face them in direct combat. Within minutes of reaching the supply depot, carefully placed explosives began chain reacting through the Bruthan ammunition stores, fuel reserves, and equipment warehouses. As massive explosions lit up space around the destroyed depot, Major Yang Min-su transmitted a message directly to the enemy fleet on all frequencies. This is how apex predators hunt. We don't just use brute force. We study our prey, learn their weaknesses, and turn their own strength against them. The message sent chills through every Bruthan warrior who heard it. For the first time in their species' history, they were experiencing something they had only inflicted on others: genuine fear. These humans didn't just fight like other species. They transformed the very battlefield into their ally, turning every aspect of the environment into a weapon designed specifically to destroy their enemies. The Bruthan Empire, masters of intimidation. For millennia, we're learning what it felt like to be the hunted rather than the hunters. The moment the Bruthon forces began retreating from the main battle zone, something fundamental changed in the nature of the conflict. What had started as a desperate defense of the Villani system transformed into something far more dangerous for the invading empire. The humans stopped acting like defenders and started behaving like the apex predators they truly were. Colonel Baek Sumin led the transformation with a strategy that would have been impossible for any prey species to conceive. Instead of celebrating their defensive victory and rebuilding their damaged positions, human forces immediately began pursuing the retreating Bruthan elements back to their forward staging areas. Using captured enemy technology and uniforms taken from destroyed ships, her strike teams infiltrated Bruthan military installations with an efficiency that shocked even their Villani allies. Villani strategist Korthan watched the human tactical displays with growing amazement as red dots representing enemy positions began disappearing from their star charts. "They're not just defending anymore," he observed to his fellow council members, his voice filled with both admiration and concern. "They're hunting. I've studied military history for decades, and I've never seen a defensive force transition. Two offensive operations this quickly or this effectively." The change in human behavior was systematic and terrifying in its precision. Captain Chen Wusung's stealth squadron had spent weeks mapping Bruthan supply routes and communication networks across 3 different star systems. Now they were using that intelligence to systematically dismantle the enemy's ability to wage war. Each destroyed supply convoy didn't just weaken the massive Bruthan invasion force, it also provided the humans with captured communications equipment, strategic documents, and prisoners who could be questioned about enemy plans and weaknesses. The information gathered from these operations revealed something that shocked the human Command staff. The Bruthan Empire was beginning to panic. Intelligence officer Shin Yaren had been monitoring captured Bruthan communications for days. What she was hearing would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. Admiral War Chieftain Tholgax has sent 3 separate requests for reinforcements to Bruthan High Command, she reported during the daily briefing. According to our translations, this is the first time in their recorded history that any Bruthan commander has needed to call for backup during a conquest operation. The psychological impact of the human hunting campaign was devastating to enemy morale. Bruthan soldiers, who had spent their entire careers terrorizing helpless civilians and poorly organized planetary defense forces, suddenly found themselves in a completely unfamiliar situation. They were being stalked by an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere, strike with deadly precision, and disappear before they could mount any effective response. For generations, Bruthan warriors had enjoyed the psychological advantage of being the hunters. They were the ones who chose when and where to attack, the ones who inspired fear in their enemies, the ones who controlled the pace and direction of every conflict. They found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, never knowing when or where the next human strike team would appear. The fear was made worse by the humans' unpredictable tactics. Unlike previous enemies who had followed predictable patterns of behavior, human forces seemed to operate without any logical structure that Bruthan commanders could understand. They would attack supply depots in one system, while simultaneously launching raids on communication facilities 3 systems away, creating a sense of chaos that the methodical Bruthan military mind couldn't process. Admiral Go Hun-woo stood in the command center of the UES Retribution, watching with quiet satisfaction as the tactical display updated in real time. Red dots representing Bruthan military positions were disappearing at an accelerating rate as human hunter-killer teams methodically picked apart the enemy's extended formation across multiple star systems. The Bruthan built their empire on fear, he told his staff officers, his voice calm but filled with grim determination. For 50 years, they've used terror as their primary weapon, making entire civilizations surrender rather than face the horror of fighting them. He gestured toward the display showing retreating enemy forces. Time to teach them what real terror feels like. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the Bruthan Empire was experiencing something their victims had endured for decades: the helpless dread of being hunted by something deadlier, smarter, and more ruthless than themselves. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were discovering that they had no idea how to survive in that role. The cracks in the Bruthan Empire began appearing almost immediately after news of their defeats reached the far corners of their territory. For 50 years, the Empire had maintained control through a simple but effective strategy: demonstrate overwhelming power, crush any resistance, and make sure every species in the galaxy knew that opposing the Bruthan meant certain death. Now, for the first time in their history, that reputation was crumbling. Lieutenant Commander Hong Minji sat hunched over her communications console, monitoring dozens of channels across Bruthan space. What she was hearing would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Admiral, she reported with barely contained excitement, were detecting coordinated uprisings on at least 12 different worlds. The slave species that the Bruthan conquered decades ago are rebelling against their occupiers. The reports flooding in painted a picture of an empire in complete chaos. On the industrial world of Kepler-7, the Tholian workers had seized their mining facilities and were broadcasting messages of defiance. The aquatic Zephyrians, enslaved 20 years earlier, had retaken their underwater cities and were attacking Bruthan naval bases. Even the peaceful Crystalline Collective, known throughout the galaxy for their pacifist philosophy, had begun using their advanced technology to jam Bruthan communication networks. What made these uprisings so significant wasn't just their scope, but their timing. These weren't desperate last stands by dying civilizations. They were calculated rebellions by species, who had watched the mighty Bruthan Empire flee in terror from a previously unknown enemy. If humans could defeat the supposedly invincible Bruthan, then perhaps freedom was possible for everyone. Aboard the crippled dreadnought Bonecrusher, War Chieftain Tholgax found himself facing something he had never encountered in his long military career: doubt from his own subordinates. The massive command bridge, once a symbol of Bruthon supremacy, now felt like a tomb as damaged systems sparked and emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the walls. His senior officers stood around the tactical table. Their usual confident posture had been replaced by nervous glances and whispered conversations. The humans had accomplished something that no enemy in Bruthan history had ever managed. They had made the galaxy's most feared warriors genuinely afraid. Sub-Commander Velenok, normally one of Thulgax's most loyal supporters, finally found the courage to voice what everyone on the bridge was thinking. "Lord Chieftain," he said, his voice barely louder than a whisper, "perhaps we should consider a strategic withdrawal. We could regroup our forces, study these humans more carefully, and return when we better understand their capabilities." The suggestion hung in the air like a physical presence. The idea that the Bruthan Empire might retreat from any enemy was so unprecedented that none of the other officers knew how to react. They had conquered 47 star systems without ever needing to withdraw from a single battle. Silence. Thulgax roared, his massive fists slamming down on the tactical table hard enough to crack its armored surface. "The Bruthan Empire does not retreat. We do not withdraw. We do not surrender." But even as he spoke, everyone on the bridge could hear the desperation in his voice. His authority was cracking like his ship's hull under the relentless human bombardment, the psychological warfare campaign that Captain Kim Do-young had been conducting throughout. Bruthan space was having an even more devastating effect than the military victories. His team had been intercepting enemy communication networks and broadcasting carefully crafted messages that combined footage of human victories with testimonies from newly liberated worlds. "This is Captain Kim of the Terran Defense Force." His calm, professional voice echoed across Bruthan military frequencies. "Your empire is falling not because we have bigger ships or more advanced weapons, but because you never learned the fundamental difference between a predator and an apex predator." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You built your power by terrorizing herbivores and prey species who had never learned to fight back. We are the evolutionary product of a world where predators compete with other predators for survival. We are what your nightmares fear." The final psychological blow came when 3 separate Bruthan fleet commanders made decisions that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. Rather than face human forces in direct combat, they chose to surrender their entire battle groups, thousands of ships and millions of soldiers, without firing a single shot. The sight of proud Bruthan warriors kneeling in surrender before what they had always considered prey species shattered the last remnants of their empire's psychological foundation. Across the galaxy, species that had lived in terror of the Bruthon, named 4 generations, watched in amazement as the supposedly invincible conquerors begged for mercy. The hunters had become the hunted, and unlike humanity, they could not adapt to their new role. The Bruthan Empire was discovering that fear, once lost, was almost impossible to regain. The end of the Bruthan Empire came not with the thunderous roar of a final battle, but with the quiet desperation of a broken leader pleading for his people's lives. War Chieftain Thulgax, once the most feared military commander in the galaxy, now stood alone on the bridge of his crippled flagship, stripped of his titles and authority by his own terrified subordinates. His massive hand shook as he opened a communication channel to Admiral Park Jinwoo aboard the UES Retribution. The proud warrior who had once commanded fleets numbering in the thousands now looked like a defeated old creature, his 4 eyes dulled with exhaustion and despair. "Admiral Park," Thulgax began, his voice barely recognizable from the confident roar that had once terrorized entire star systems. "Your species... Your species fought like the void incarnate. Like death itself had taken physical form and learned military tactics." He paused, struggling to find words that had never been spoken in Bruthan history. We yield. The Bruthan Empire surrenders unconditionally to humanity." The transmission was broadcast across the entire galaxy, reaching every species that had lived in fear of Bruthan conquest for the past 50 years. The reaction was immediate and profound. Celebrations erupted on thousands of worlds as billions of beings realized that their nightmare was finally over. What surprised many observers was how humanity handled their victory. There were no massive victory parades through conquered Breathen cities, no boastful speeches about human superiority, no demands for tribute or territory. Instead, there was only the quiet, professional efficiency of a species that had turned warfare into a precise art form. Admiral Park Jin-woo's response to the surrender was characteristically direct. The Breathen Empire is hereby dissolved. Enslaved species are immediately granted their freedom. Any attempts to restart hostilities will be met with the full force of the Terran Defense Force. We came here to help the innocent, not to conquer an empire. Months later, Elder Nathera of the Villani found herself walking through the same docking bay where she had first met the humans. But everything had changed since that terrifying first encounter. Instead of the trembling, pale creature who had barely been able to speak from fear, she now moved with the confidence of someone who had witnessed the impossible and lived to tell about it. Captain Li Huyan was waiting for her near the same airlock where Dr. Kim Yuna had first stepped onto their station. The human officer looked exactly the same as he had during their first meeting. But Nathera now understood that his calm demeanor wasn't threatening. It was the quiet strength of someone who had no need to prove his power to anyone. "Captain Li," she said, her voice steady and strong, "we owe you more than our lives. You didn't just save us from the Breathen. You've given us something we never had before. Hope. Hope that the strong don't always have to prey on the weak. Hope that someone will stand up for those who can't defend themselves." Li Haon nodded respectfully, his weathered face showing genuine warmth. "Fear has its place in the universe, Elder Nathera. It can keep you alive in dangerous situations. But it should never rule anyone's life or determine their future." He gestured toward the viewport showing the rebuilt Villani fleet patrolling their system. "You're much stronger than you ever knew. You just needed someone to show you that strength doesn't always mean being the biggest predator in the room." Across the galaxy, the transformation was remarkable to witness. Former Breathen slave worlds were rebuilding their civilizations with an energy and optimism that hadn't been seen in decades. The Terran Defense Force had established small but highly visible presences in key star systems. Throughout former Breathen territory, not as occupying forces, but as guardians ready to respond if any new threats emerged. Dr. Kim Yuna, now serving as Earth's first galactic ambassador, transmitted humanity's official diplomatic message to every species in known space. Her words were heard by billions of beings across thousands of worlds. "The people of Earth extend our friendship to all peaceful species throughout the galaxy. We seek cooperation, trade, mutual understanding with any civilization that shares our values of freedom and respect for life." Her voice carried the quiet authority that had become humanity's trademark. To those who might consider threatening innocent populations, remember the fate of the Breathen Empire. The galaxy has new guardians now, and we will not hesitate to act if peaceful species are endangered. The age of the Breathen had ended with their empire's collapse. The age of humanity was just beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same.